Hello everyone and welcome to this intermediate level tutorial video where I'm going to be showing you how to build a VTOL, which is a vertical liftoff and landing vehicle, or otherwise known as a tilt rotor. It uses these tilting sort of wings to put the propellers or rotors in a certain position such that you can go quite fast like a helicopter or like a plane. So you can see now we're in the plane mode, and quite easily we can revert into a helicopter mode. This is one of my favorite style of vehicles to build in Stormworks, or at least favorite style of support vehicles, because they're absolutely invaluable. They're so useful. You can go fast when you need to go fast. You can land in very tight places on boats and ships, whatever, so they're super useful. Now this is a smaller version. I'm obviously not going to be showing you how to build this cleaned up sort of stylized one of my own creations, but rather our starting point will be the transverse helicopter that I've showed you how to build in the previous tutorials. So transverse helicopter, just for a little quick refresher, has the propellers mounted on these kind of wings, so it is perpendicular to the body of the helicopter, not parallel like a Chinook, and it uses these small pivots. But the transverse helicopter is still a helicopter. It doesn't turn into an airplane like a VTOL. We also learned that you could make a transverse style helicopter without using pivots, so thank you to the user that pointed that out. And of course we have the other tutorial that shows you how to do this. So in this case you have no pivots, but you have a bit more of a rugged microcontroller that contains the roll, the yaw, and the pitch, and it kind of feeds into these rotors. So if you followed the pivotless style of transverse helicopter, then what you'll have to do is take this and actually remove part of it as this, and then what we'll do is we're going to add pivots in. Now I know you know how to do this, but I'm just going to show you really quickly because it's a little bit different. We're going to put a power pivot, and what we want is it to be in line with the rotors at the end, and we could pivot this around until the input node is on the bottom there, so we could easily input from our engines, and then just drag this out to here and up into the rotor. Now of course we'll have to separate the body of the rotor and this node here, so we can just cut, paste, and now everything can be attached. Same thing here. We'll go to this one, cut, paste, everything can be attached, and then we'll just plug in the engines. So the engines are now plugged in. You can see this one coming from the rear is going to the left side and right side from the front, and I went ahead and changed these rotors or blades into the light end rotor, or rotor end light, because it's smaller, so we can actually tilt it while it's on the ground and the rotors aren't so big to hit the ground. So I recommend using them, and it's just a simple splicing in the path from the previous rotor into them. Anytime you put new rotor blades in for a helicopter, you gotta make sure that you are in the neutral mode. Otherwise, you're gonna end up going constantly up. So make sure they're neutral. And I made a mistake. I captured this later on, so you'll see in the next sequence of the video, I'm actually gonna have this shown like this, but you have to put it to be neutral. We're gonna need to make sure that the new pivots are attached to the electricity node. And right now, of course, there is nothing on the rotation target, but one other thing that we'll want to do for the VTOL mode is make sure we're at gear ratio 3:1. I know we're using 5:2, but 3:1 will give us more power in the plane mode, better to take off and all that good stuff. So 3:1 power ratio on both gearboxes if you're using the same setup as me, or you'll have to manually just adjust it if you're using a different style of engine or motors. But in essence, you want the revolutions at the rotors to be the highest possible. So what do we have? We have this microcontroller down here that we developed as the transverse fixed helicopter, and in essence it has the pitch, roll yaw coming out of the gyroscope and goes to the roll of both rotors and the pitch of both rotors. Now, if you're following the tutorial for the other more complex style transverse helicopter with the pivots, I do recommend you actually go and apply this system from the, call it pivotless transverse style helicopter, for the only reason of it'll make things easier for you moving forward. Because funny enough, even though it didn't have a pivot, it used what I think of as a better, more stable system for actually yawing the helicopter, which is to use the pitch. So I recommend you go follow that, because we're going to continue on from that point of view, that we're using the pivotless helicopter mode and obviously the pivots to make it turn into a plane. So inside this microcontroller, the Transverse Fixed Heli microcontroller, this will become our VTOL MC. And what we're going to need to do is add a few things. So first things first, we're going to add a toggle button, on off, input. That's going to turn this whole contraption into plane mode. So with it in plane mode, we're going to need two more nodes that are both numbers. One is number input, one is number output, and it is the collective. So we're going to put collective on both of these, and of course one is the collective from the gyroscope, or coming in, and one is the collective going out to the rotors. We'll increase the size of this microcontroller and place it here. So now there we have it. And what we're going to need to do is connect. So where we have the collective coming out of the gyroscope, we're going to want to put in our collective here. And then collective rotor, we put on both rotor ends. So now coming out of this is pretty much everything. And what we'll do is just put another button here. And this is going to go to the plane mode. And we're just going to label it plane mode so we can easily refer to it and make sure it's plugged in to electricity. Now, a bit of a refresher course. Hopefully you watched the plane video that I put out for plane tutorials if you're not familiar on how to make a plane. But you could see, while it is pretty ugly, it does have all the basic functions. And coming out of the seat, we have AD going to these flaps, which are the roll. So if we take a look at AD, it's roll, WS pitch, left, right, yaw. So all of these are attached. We have the yaw going to this flap right in the back, and we have the pitch going to these. So what we're going to need to do is add these, call it control devices, I think is what the game calls them, but they're flaps. We're going to put them on the wings of this helicopter as well as on the back, or I should call it a VTOL. So that is one thing that will have to be adjusted going into plane mode, is it's now using the ailerons, it's using the flaps, it's not using what's coming out of these rotors anymore. So you can see here we have positive up, over there we have negative up, and then back here they're both negative up. Now of course that may be adjusted for when we plug things into the microcontroller, because sometimes things kind of change and shift just depending on creations. They don't shift by themselves, but if I had the negative number input, for example, in the plane, then it won't transfer over here. So I always do that by trial and error rather than thinking about it too hard, just because it does make it a little easier in my mind. So we can go ahead and put these flaps, and remember we had positive in this direction or in this side, and it was negative over here. Now again, we'll see if that actually works with the controls we have on our specific VTOL. And you can see back here we have this fin, very ugly and kind of strange looking, but that's okay. Over here what we're going to do is add a little bit of a fin, and I always love the Osprey VTOL. Kind of has two, but obviously this is just a very basic attempt at showing you how this works. So we can do something like this, And then we'll add these flaps. So you can see the red flaps over there. I'm just going to keep the same color coding because that is what we used there. And we had negative up on both of them. So these would control our pitch. And then we have the green one over there that controls the yaw. Now, one thing that I do recommend for a VTOL, especially if it's light, like take a look at how small this thing is, to not use this massive flap on the back, because you will result in making your vehicle very uncontrollable. You're going to turn and it's going to kind of swing out because the flap is way too strong. So what we're going to do is just take a look at the number sign or negative, and negative is on the left, and we'll just put this small one. So we don't need the big one. This should be enough for a VTOL this size. Of course, if you're making a bigger VTOL, you do want to size up. We do need to connect all these flaps to power. And that is our VTOL starting point. Now back inside the microcontroller, we're going to hop in here and add width. Now what we previously had is all of these things coming from the gyroscope are clear, right? This is going to the rotor. And now that rotor is the roll for the helicopter mode. So I'm just going to put heli. This is the roll for the helicopter mode. This is the pitch for the helicopter mode. This is the pitch for the rotor helicopter mode and helicopter mode. So you could really see that what we ended up with are a bunch of different things going to the helicopter mode. Now we have nothing going to the pivot, so that is the first thing we have to add. And we're just going to call this a number output going to the pivots. And because we have only, we don't need them to move independently, like what we did for the original transverse helicopter to get it to yaw, it kind of pivoted individually. This can just go to the singular pivots, or one node goes to both pivots, and that's totally fine. That's why I recommend everybody transfer over to the pivotless style transverse helicopter for this tutorial. So we have pivots, and then what we can do is add a couple of other things. So we're going to put a number output going to the yaw flap, I guess plane mode. Then we have our roll, same thing. So I'm just going to copy paste this. We have our roll flap output, and we will have our pitch flap output. So with these numbers now, we can pop out back here and attach to the flaps and attach to the pivots. So pivots go in here, yaw flap goes to the yaw, which is back here. We have our roll flap, which are these two, and that's why they're different signs. That's why one is negative, one is positive, because otherwise you'd have to in your microcontroller have left right with a number inverse. So it's just easier just to do it like this. And we have our pitch, and I misspelt that, but we could see here and put it on those back there. So that covers attaching things. I'm just going to rename the pitch because I don't like that. And now we hop into the logic sequence. So I'm just going to extract this up here, separate them out based on if they're inputs or outputs. Always do that because then it's a little bit easier. So we have a couple different things. Our plane mode on-off input is going to govern everything. The collective is quite simple. We find our collective going to the rotor, and what we're going to do is have a number switch box or numerical switch box. So the collective coming out of the gyro is when it is in helicopter mode, so when it's off. When it's on in plane mode, we need this just to be a constant number, and we'll try it with 1. But in essence, you just want forward action. You just want the thing to go forward. You don't need to adjust the gyro or the collective from the gyro, going up and down if you want to go down on the helicopter mode. No, now you're just purely going forward. So that's the first one we put in, and that one is relatively simple. Another relatively simple one should be the pivots. Previously, they should be at 0 because we are in helicopter mode, so I don't need to put anything for when it's off. When it is on, we have to take a look at where the sign is. So here, and I don't know why these got deleted, so just fix that. So we see the sign is here, so we need it to go into the positive. Positive 1 will push both of these pivots into the forward direction. Now, because we are not, because we're using them at the same time, technically you could join them, I believe, but I would avoid that for now. Just we'll see if we get strange physics. Keep them separate. Of course, if one breaks and is slightly different, then of course you're going to crash, but keep it separate for now. So you can see we need 1. So back inside the microcontroller, this same 1 can be applied. When it is in plane mode, the pivots are going to pivot forward and we're going to have forward action. So now we get to the other ones, the pitch, the roll, the yaw. For the pitch flap of the plane mode, you actually don't even have to have it in here. It's kind of taking up space, because what you could just do is have it go directly from the gyroscope into the flap for the plane, and then you don't have to have this here at all. But I do want to keep everything inside this microcontroller for the reason of it just being in one place. And of course, if you don't like the idea of the pitch flap moving when you are in helicopter mode, meaning it's not really doing anything, you could of course attach it to this. So then have it only come on when you are actually in plane mode. So when this thing is on, then you get this being on. So you could do that. You don't have to do that. You could have the pitch flaps always moving up and down, even if you are in helicopter mode, or you could do something like this. So that goes there. Now the actual pitch going into the rotors, that's something else. For the two remaining ones, the yaw and the roll, well, the roll, we're going to go, and you see here how we have the roll going into the helicopter left and right. Then we could just put in a numerical switch box or a numerical junction that operates such that when the roll from the gyroscope goes in here, when it is off, meaning it's a helicopter, they just go back to where they previously were. So we just spliced in this numerical junction. But when this is on, it's going to go to the roll flap of the plane mode. So I need to connect this, and that just uses the numerical junction. You could use two numerical switch boxes, one set with the value on, one set with the value off, but the numerical junction just abbreviates that, makes it a little easier. So here we have the roll, or the going into the plane, and now we just have the yaw. So for the yaw, you see we're using a combination of things that goes into here and into the pitch. That's how we're getting it to steer. That was what we covered in the simple pivotless style of helicopter. Now we can go here, put a numerical junction, and we'll do the same idea. So this time the yaw is coming in, and when it is on, meaning it's a plane, we need it to go to the plane flap. And I need to connect this on, off to the numerical junction. And when it is off, meaning it's not a helicopter, not a plane, so therefore it is a helicopter, then we just have it going to the same three places it was going previously. So in this case, it goes to those, and it goes there. So now we've spliced in the yaw flap. The pitch stays as it is, because you see here we could use the pitch on the flap for the plane mode, but also it's still staying on the rotor for the helicopter mode, and we'll see if that works for us or if we have to do something else. So final test of these, we could see that we have everything attached. We have our button attached. Everything should be lit up on the electrical. We'll do a little flight check. We'll turn plane mode on. So you see these turn there. And then if I hit AD, we get a roll. If I hit left, right, we get our yaw. And if I hit the WS, I'm getting my pitch flaps. So everything seems to be working here. One thing I will add to the bottom of the VTOL here are little wheels, these little rollers, just because in order to get a running start, we have to actually have wheels. So this will help us test out the plane mode as the starting option. So if I turn this and hold S, we've kind of taken off. You can see you're getting something crazy like this. The first thing we want to check in this instant is, first of all, remove any trim that we may have that was carried over from the previous version of the helicopter, one of the ways that we could keep it stable, but we don't want any trim first. And it seemed that the flaps were in the incorrect direction, so I do want to put the negative on top there, and the positive on top here. So that might help us out a little bit too. Just like that. Another thing that we noticed is these flaps were flapping like crazy, going up and down, trying to keep up with the gyroscope. So what we can actually do in that instant is we can go into the gyroscope itself, and for the pitch we can turn it down. Let's put it to 60%, and that should control some of that crazy flapping that we observed. So again, plane mode, and let's pull up. And now we have our ailerons working. Okay, we just cleared that, but there we have it. Now we're still getting some funny flaps going on there for the back. Way too much, but let's try to yaw. So, okay, we're able to yaw. Now, the thing that I do want to mention is that VTOLs are a little bit complex because they have two functions. They're a helicopter and a plane, so you have to kind of be weary of how you program each part of each one of them. So for example, we probably want to limit how much we could yaw. We don't want to be able to turn this the full one amount, because now you get kind of this weird drifting action. Now one thing we'll jump back to from the previous helicopter video is you can see here we also have the max throttle set to 65. So that does change how much goes into the collective for the helicopter mode. So if you're finding that the helicopter is too responsive, you could turn this down. I find 65 is good for this size of helicopter. If you have a heavier helicopter, you probably want to adjust it. But anytime you get any weird jerky action, you want to turn it down. So again, our pitch was still jerky. We'll put it down to 45%. I do want to say that this is why people tend to make their own gyroscopes rather than using the pre-made in-game one, because you have a bit more control. So anyway, just testing out our helicopter mode again. We have it working properly. We have collective, we have the pitch, we have the roll, we have the yaw, so everything works in the helicopter mode. And now if I turn it into plane mode, first of all, good news is, oh, we still got the flappy action on the back. Okay, so got to fix that a little bit again, but everything else seems to work. Now we are losing some altitude, and now we're gaining it again because I'm holding S. So again, there is a bit of balancing for fine-tuning this thing, but in essence, this is a working VTOL. And I might make another video on how to perfect your VTOL, how to clean it up, make it work a little bit nicer, better, but this is pretty much it. One thing I did mention wanting to do is changing the yaw for the flap. So what we're just going to do is put a very simple clamp that will, in essence, restrict the flap by going from negative 0.5 to positive 0.5. I mean, we could even make this less. Let's go 4.4, just because we don't really want it to be going like crazy. And yes, I could turn the pitch down even more. You just have to be careful, because if you turn it down too much, it will become unresponsive. So the first thing I want to do is check in my helicopter mode how the pitch works. So you can see we're pitching and it works pretty well, so no complaints on my end here. And if I turn on the airplane mode, let's see if we get a little less crazy flapping. Oh, Okay, well you can see we're getting less crazy flapping. We just have, like, I'm holding S all the way now, and we're not really able to gain much more height. So it restricts how much you actually can control that pitch mode. So now we're going to end up crashing into the ground because it's a little too unresponsive. So you can compare to this. This is 100% pitch, and of course it does give us a bit more motion, but also look at them. So you do have to do a little bit of testing to find kind of that fine ground. Also yaw, you can reduce a little bit if you need to, so you can play with these numbers if you're getting any jerky actions, but in essence, that's all down to fine-tuning. As long as the various parts of your creation work, which in this case, like I said, all the parts of the helicopter work, and if we rotate this, all the parts of the plane work. One thing I do want to add are these wing sections. So this may actually help the plane take off. And you can see I had them in the wrong direction on this example. They should be facing up to provide lift. And then over here we could put it on the front of the wing. I know it's not very pretty. You'd probably want to put it on the other side. As an example like this. And they still work even if there's things in the way. So like that would still function. And let's see if this takes off any better, because I'm quite low health and I can't sustain one more crash into those mountains over there. Whoa. Got us a little higher. Wow, we just cleared it. So it does help with the lift to have the wing sections, obviously, because previously we were relying purely on the flaps to control what we wanted. Now you can see we're still getting the jitters. So there is some more fine-tuning that can be done and should be done, but at this point you have a working VTOL. Here is the other VTOL that had the wings with the engines mounted on them. So if you did it this way, you can see that it's actually using still the principle but of moving, tilting the rotors slightly, but I do find it's better to do what I showed in the simplified transverse style helicopter, just because it makes it a little more clear cut. But regardless, the same principle applied, you can end up with a working VTOL. Now one thing you don't want to do is have really crazy quick abrupt motion. You kind of want slow and gentle motion that will allow you to not spin out in the air. But you can see this is working, and if we turn off the plane mode, it goes into the helicopter mode. Now you do get a bit of that fade where between the two different modes, if you don't press the up arrow, like if you don't give it collective, it actually will start to like fall. So once I hit the up arrow, it actually collects itself. So that's one of those things under fine-tuning. Like in the microcontroller, you could make a function that gives collective instead of dropping it off right away, because that's the kind of stuff that drives the pre-made gyroscope crazy. Altitude hold's obviously a big thing for the actual plane mode, because right now the way to control the altitude is through these back pitch flaps. So right now we're kind of losing, once it stabilizes itself, it starts to lose altitude, but you yourself see right now it's losing it, but you could make an altitude hold function. Alternatively, obviously, if you hold alt, you can do a bit of trimming with W and S until it's kind of stable, but I do think a proper altitude hold function is better. Anyway, there you have it, a working VTOL in a simplified form. Let me know if you want another video talking about the advanced functions, how to fine-tune it, make it function a bit better. It does get a little tricky and there is a bit of trial and error there, but it is possible. So thank you all so much for your support, for watching, for commenting, for being a part of this process and a bit of the community. And again, a huge shout out to all of my supporters for going the extra mile. I really appreciate their extra support, their generosity, and it really pushes me to make bigger and better projects, videos, all kinds of stuff. So thank you so much, and huge shout out to my moderator admin team. Until next time, happy Stormworksing everyone.